The feminist aesthetic is the one that put the woman as a sign, wrapped in a chain of patriarchal oppressions and repressions, that must be broken through the consciousness of how is the masculine superiority practiced and fought. The feminist art would be the one that looks to correct the stereotype images of the feminine that the hegemonic masculine has degraded and punished. As the feminism threatened the androcentric identity paradigm, it opened the doors to the questioning of any type of difference between subjects, socially agreed from a model that imposed a place of privilege, exclusive. The body is the excuse of the investigation about the subjectivity and the social structure that conforms it. It is seen as an ideological construction, and that's why it starts the reflection about identities that, in the case of women, it's also related with the resize of her social role. It is required to start from this primary material that conforms a biological, sexual identity that knows itself different and, from there, search for a new and more compelling ideological representation, a wider speech. The established differences between the body parts, right and left, allow given specific characteristics to the subjects and not only divide them in masculine and feminine, respectively, but also inscribe them in the chain of meanings that each one of these terms drag: superior, inferior, culture, nature, mind, body, spirit, material, subject, object, production, reproduction, public, private. In this assignation, the body is just the physical and concrete axis of a symbolic territoriality that reassures the power structures, placed in an economic ground that encourages the supremacy of the male sex. The history is built on an idea of humanity identified with the masculine, that hides its orientation in generic and ambiguous terms, as the idea of man, in order to sustain the privilege of a partisan value system. The unconscious and the sexuality are not in any way given facts, but constructions. It means the result of a history, and the human subject itself is constituted through it. Thinking about the civilization as a naturalized version of the domain of a way of thinking that hides its masculine gender, as a paradigmatic model of social organization, and privilege the heterosexual relationships inside a pattern of normality, discriminating other options while the subjects must adecwate to these principles. The woman is an animal of long hair and short understanding. The notions of women and femininity are theoretical constructions that don't represent a real existence in the natural order. They are meanings chained in a signed system inside of which we find also the nature. The notion of women is articulated in the speech because the language names it from the sexual difference. This means against the idea of man, and becomes the other, or that is missing in a symbolic level, in opposition to the phallus as a significant of desire. The woman is the imperfect man. The virile archetype, in its condition of model on which the cultural is hierarchically ordered, encourages an androcentric system that, unlike the sexism, acquires a greater domain, a central configuration which axis is the man. Masculine being in opposition to the woman and the gods of an adult age determinates social position and virile qualities. It acts as the ideal model of the real man because it shows his capacities to exercise territorial expansion. The gender category brings up a specificity and subordination of the women's speech from an androcentric perspective that not only marks the sexual differences between the bodies, but also establishes the spaces to be occupied in the culture. The gender, more than a construction, is performative. Saying that the language and the culture are indifferent to the gender sexual difference reinforces the established power while it keeps covering the techniques in which the hegemonic masculinity conceals with the neutral, the impersonal, its own obsession to personify the universal. The depersonalized masculine I that drags with itself the us puts at a disadvantage the personification of a feminine I that doesn't have a grammatical value. The ambiguity of the use of the masculine sometimes establishes a differentiating condition, but in general it tends to identify itself with the universal, and in opposition the feminine is recognized as the non-masculine. Every writing articulated as disobedience is placed in the margins and doesn't come in to take part in the androcentric game. What really characterized the feminine is its place of active margin in the symbolic order. From there, its special subversive condition. The women have long skirts and short spirit. Everything comes from God, except for the woman. If the woman was good, God will also have one. I think none of us exists outside of a very complex social construction. Each one of us has a role in this construction. Some have more power than others. Some are visible. Others are absent, invisible, but we are still there. Some of us have been heard, and some of our voices have been silenced. What I and other colleagues have tried to say is that we must be present and not absent, and also show that the power can be used in many ways. The fight to access the interpretative power that is referred to the necessity that the subaltern voices manifest of pronouncing their own voices and having the authority regarding the configuration of identities, subverting then the order that names. The hegemonic speech needs to know and control other knowledge, and that's why it writes them to neutralize them and place them inside the established order. The art and the language in general are marked by gender, race, sexuality, and social class conditions. The feminist creation questioned the notion of individuality and artistic genius to encourage the collective experiences and value the personal as political, in opposition to the language orientated towards an universal and neutral expression. They introduce a figurative imaginary with a strong political emphasis, recognizing the expressive power of the self-representation or the personal through the self-portrait. Many images in the art history have tried to make a religious, patriotic, or domestic ideal out of the female figure, or have used it as a central stimulus for a male audience. Defining the feminine as the denied and subversive, the spectrum of analysis opened itself to contain a series of voices that were marginalized by the culture. Being homosexual and being a woman represents a double condition of marginality. The woman is the subject that suffers in her own body this repression or double dislocation, and can analyze the reality, 1. Through her imposed role, derivate from an original dislocation that forces her to resign to a natural masculinity, as the libido is supposed to be masculine, turning her into a pretender when she assumes the woman's role, meaning that she must abandon her original desire and accept herself as pure representation. 2. Through her dislocation in writing, meaning of the capacity of having a voice of her own, because she is an object identified by the culture that names her from an ideologically male gaze. In Latin America, the woman finds herself 3 times dislocated. She is dislocated from her primordial desire. Then she is named by a culture that doesn't belong to her. And last, to the West, she is part of the other, as she is immersed in a peripheral geographical space. She is 3 times dislocated as she is a woman, artist, and Latin American. Hence, the political act becomes 2 times decolonizing, not only from the liberation of sexual prejudices, but also from the mutilating cultural dependencies. It is necessary that the woman write herself because it is the invention of a new, insurgent writing, and that, when the moment of her liberation arrives, will allow her to do the necessary fractures and transformations in her history. She will go back to that body that, at the very least, was confiscated, that body that was transformed in the unsettling strange of the place, the sick or the death, and that so often is the bad friend, cause and place of the inhibitions. To censure the body is to censure also the breath, the word.